Great. Okay, welcome. Oh, we're not muted. I apologize for that. We have many different cameras going on in here. So welcome everybody to today's webinar. My name is Della Hall and I am the Executive Director of Museums Alaska. Thank you for joining us. If you could please just type in the chat letting me know that you can hear me okay. I believe you can because I just heard myself on a different camera, but just let me know. Great, thank you guys. So I just want to start out this webinar by saying thank you to the Alaska State Museum. This project is supported by a grant and aid from the Alaska State Museum and is made possible through partnership with the Western Museum Association. So thank you to both of those partners and organizations. I also want to thank the University of Alaska Museum of the North and specifically Angela Lynn, who is staying off camera, but she is here helping us today. We're actually being hosted in the museum and in the Ethnology and History Lab. So thank you to Angie for that. This is a 4-part webinar series, or 4 webinars. They're not actually related to one another, funded through the Grant and Aid Program. And this is the 3rd webinar. So we have one more coming up, and it is, you can see here on the screen, will be in October, Caring for Outdoor Wood Art with Ellen Carley. So we encourage you to take a look at our events page and register for that when registration becomes available. It's not available yet, but soon. I'd like to ask you all to please use the chat feature. Some of you already have, to send any questions that you have. We will try to get to them if we can. We're going to hold off until the end to answer questions. So please just go ahead and type them in when you have them, and then we'll try to answer them in the end. And if we don't get to your question, you can always follow up afterwards and with Nicole or with myself about your question. You will receive an email afterwards that will contain a recording of this webinar. So if you're frantically taking notes, don't worry, you will get a recording. And there will also be a survey afterwards. So please let us know how we did. Let us know what you think of the webinar so we can improve them for the future. I now have the pleasure of introducing our presenter who's hiding behind me. We are social distancing. And so we'll both be wearing masks this whole time, and Angie is as well off screen. Nicole Peters is a longtime member of the Alaska Museum community, and we are very fortunate to get to learn from her today. And I just want to thank you, Nicole, for being here, and I'll let you take it away.
Great, thank you so much, Della. I just want to also make sure that everybody can hear me right now. I believe I have all of the right buttons pressed. So I'm going to begin. Okay, so welcome. My name is Nicole Peters, and I am an objects conservator in private practice, previously based out of Skagway, Alaska, and now recently in Frederick, Maryland. I've worked with collections and sites throughout the state of Alaska since about 2012. And I'm speaking to you today, like Della mentioned, from the University of Alaska Fairbanks Museum of the North Ethnology and History Lab, which was graciously provided to us by Senior Collections Manager Angela Lynn. And so thank you very much, Angie, again. So for today's program, what I'd like to do is sort of divide the webinar into 2 parts. The first part is going to be a traditional webinar that is going to review some important information about storage mounts, housing and supports, and why we use the materials we do in museum collections. After that, we are going to take a very brief intermission and switch over to live mode, where I'll introduce the second part of the webinar, which is going to be an introduction to some of the materials we will be working with today, many of which you will receive in your toolkit. You know, I was going to say, I think everybody who is registered is going to get one of these toolkits, and we haven't narrowed down the exact list yet because due to COVID-19, there's a few hiccups with shipping and supply things. So we will put together the best possible toolkit, and I assure you it will be good. So from there, I will demonstrate constructing a custom archival box, and I also will review different mount strategies for some of the different objects that we have here in the lab today. Okay, so I always like to start off with something that one of my mentors said, and that collections care is a continuum. We were always trying to improve the standards for collections care to the best of our abilities, and oftentimes with restricted resources and budgets. And that's sort of why making boxes and housing and storage mounts for our collections is so important. It's a part of preventative conservation, and in the end, these methods can really stabilize and help to preserve our physical media for the long term. Okay, so to begin with, the type of housing you might need depends on a few things. Is your collection stored in closed cabinets or is it on open shelving? Do you have a conditioned storage space where temperature and RH, relative humidity, are stable and within acceptable ranges? Is your collection a study or research collection? And what I mean by that is, are people coming in on a regular basis to work with and access the collection? Obviously, due to COVID, this is likely quite different right now for your institution. So another thing to consider is cultural preferences. If you are storing things on behalf of Indigenous groups, then you should contact them before you plan a big rehousing project. All of these considerations can affect the type of housing and storage mounts you create for your collection items. For example, I constructed a storage mount for a cultural object that was regularly taken out of collection storage in order to participate in ceremonies. So knowing that information, the housing was considerably more robust because it was going to be handled more and transported. And it also influenced the type of materials I used in the fabrication of the housing. So in this case, I selected a water-resistant box material in the event the object experienced some sort of weather. So why is it important to house things? There are several reasons. As stated in this slide, 89% of all collection holding institutions had inadequate storage facilities, and 65% of all institutions reported damage due to improper storage. Essentially, what we're doing by creating proper housing and supports for our collection items is that we are mitigating the effects of these guys, which are known as the agents of deterioration, often discussed in art conservation and collections management literature. So some artifacts are more susceptible to these agents than others, but essentially all of these agents affect our collections to some extent. The act of housing your collection in archival materials demonstrates your commitment to creating a safe storage place for your items. It increases organization, it expedites the location and retrieval of objects, and it reduces the likelihood of components getting lost. So in the end, it's really part of the bigger preventative conservation plan. So improving the physical conditions in storage is a highly effective and easily achievable way to substantially boost overall preservation, which consists of multi-layered protection in which all components contribute to the preservation. So here we have our object in the center, and as we move outwards, we see all of the different contributing factors and components that are aiding in our object's preservation, both directly and indirectly. So as we see, we have our object in the center. Outside of that, we have our packing, or our, I guess more appropriately would be our storage supports and mounts. Those are placed in some sort of container or housing, which we're also going to discuss today. Those, the boxes or the containers are on some sort of storage furniture, a cabinet, maybe it's a closed cabinet, maybe it's open shelving. That shelving is placed in a secure collections room. That would be our inner walls or inner envelope. And then that room is inside a building. So that would be our secure building, our outer walls or our outer envelope. So as you can see, there are a lot of layered components that all contribute to this sort of care and preservation. But for today, we are going to hone in and just focus on archival materials and learning how to use these materials to construct our housing and storage supports. Okay, so there are really a plethora of archival museum collection quality housing materials out there. So before we dive into the world of inert and archival materials, I want to offer two really great resources for material identification and information. And they are STASH, which is Storage Techniques for Art, Science, and History, and PACN, or I think that's how I pronounce it, which is Preparation, Art Handling, Collections Care Information Network. These two websites offer archival material glossaries, current research in collection, storage, and management, as well as online forums where you can log in and ask for advice and get feedback, amongst a bunch of very, very helpful resources. So the materials we use for collection storage have something in common. They are what we would call archival materials. These are inert, chemically stable, acid-free, non-off-gassing materials that have been scientifically tested and proven to be safe for extended or long-term use in close proximity to artworks and artifacts. So this is key for a few reasons. First, we don't want to place any media next to our collection items that is going to potentially harm them. And also, these materials are an investment. Not only, I mean, financially they are, but they're an investment in the preservation of your collection. So you are essentially taking the steps to improve the local environment, mitigating the agents of deterioration, and also increasing the safety and security of your items. Now, if you have questions about a material and whether or not it is, quote unquote, archival or safe, or if it has been scientifically tested, which the test is known as AUDI testing, I have included here, okay, good, it did pop up. So I've provided a few links, and these are in addition to the STASH and PACN websites on the previous slide. So what I have listed here are actually two different sites from the AIC, the American Institute for Conservation, wiki page on Wikipedia. And so one of these links is for conservation supply sources, and the other is for AUDI test results of really a myriad of different products. I do want to note for the AUDI test page, be sure to read how to use the table provided and look at the results, whether the material passed, failed, or is deemed only for temporary use, because those are all options. Okay, so step one for creating your object housing is prioritization. Identify items in your collection that take priority. These are items that may be damaged, maybe they have a lot of different components or are complicated by design. Objects that have condition issues, and items that are handled more frequently. Also, you should pay attention to material types. Oftentimes, organic materials or composite objects, and composite objects are artworks or artifacts that consist of more than one type of material. These items can be more sensitive or more affected by their immediate surroundings, and they may take precedence over inorganic or compositionally stable items such as stone tools or high-fired ceramics. Again, this is a generalization. Each object should be individually assessed in order to determine need or priority when it comes to creating a housing plan or project. But if you have no idea where to start, maybe take a look at some of your organic materials first. Okay, so step two, object examination. So once you have selected your object, you are going to examine it, which means a lot of things. You don't have to develop some sort of like lengthy, very in-depth report, but you do need to look at it and you need to be able to assess what it needs. So some questions that, every time I make a box for an object, some things I ask myself, the first thing is it stable? Are there vulnerable areas, maybe prone to damage? Are there multiple components? Are there inherent vices? And examples of those can be, degrading or deteriorating silk, maybe, plastics that are off-gassing or breaking down, and so on. And so some more things to consider are, will the object be studied or accessed or researched? Will it be moved, and will it participate in ceremonies? Is it heavy or oversized? That will definitely influence your box material and design. Okay, there's a lot going on in this slide, but we'll get through it. So once you have identified your object's needs and assessed its condition concerns, now it's time to select the type of material you want to use for your housing. Now, a lot of this is personal preference, but there are some, practical things to consider when selecting your housing material, which we sort of reviewed in the previous slide a little bit. So your first decision is going to be paper or plastic, really. So paper, we're talking about chemically stable, lignin-free, buffered enclosures and supports. Oftentimes you hear people talk about blue board or E-flute or B-flute or corrugated blue board or so on. So there's a lot of nicknames that get tossed around. And then if you move over to the plastic aisle, we're talking specifically about polyethylene and polypropylene, or a blend of the two. Do not get vinyl or PVC or use any unidentified plastics. These can actually be quite harmful to your collection items. And so names that these fall under, Coroplast, which is actually a registered trademark product, or I've heard some people call it polyflute, which is a kind of a good name. So both of these materials have pros and cons. And some things to think about is, what type of housing are you making? Are you making a tray or a lidded box? Does the box need to be weatherproof? Is the container going inside a closed cabinet? If so, maybe you don't need a lid. And the pros and cons that I've listed here really come down to, like I said, you will become familiar with these products and you will develop your own sort of preferences and pros and cons. But for me, the paper products are a little bit easier to work with. I think it's a more forgivable material. They come pre-buffered for greater absorption of pollutants and acid, and they are thin and lightweight. But some cons are that, these products are not water resistant. They can be difficult to clean if they get dirty. They're not as robust. And after, extended use, the alkaline reserve or the buffering agent can actually deplete, and then you will have to replace them at some point. Now moving to the plastic or the Coroplast, our pros are it's water resistant, it's easier to clean, and it's definitely a stronger and more robust material. Some cons, they can be a little tricky, less forgiving material to work with. Angie and I were sharing sort of battle stories, sort of wrestling with Coroplast and getting like little cuts on our hands and everything. So it can be a little bit more of a workout. It can leave some sharp edges. It definitely requires more tools and parts for construction and assembly. And I haven't checked price lists recently, but the last time I checked, the Coroplast products in sheets were more expensive. Okay, so for today, we are going to focus on a simple box form for our housing container. The method involves taking some basic measurements of our artifact, plotting out our diagram on paper, and then constructing the container. Now, there are numerous ways to sort of approach this. Everyone has different tricks and tips that they've learned over the years, myself included. And the boxes themselves can be quite amazing. And these are some examples I got from the Stash website, and the diagrams are available. You can access them. But this is a really cool drop side sliding tray box. This was designed by Deborah Confort. And there's also a really cool modified clamshell box for odd shaped 3D objects by Bridget Sullivan. So there are a lot of options out there to explore when it comes to box design. And all of these diagrams are available on the Stash website, along with a ton of really great box solutions for some pretty tricky objects. And like I said, you can pull these up for reference and try a few out at your leisure. And really, when it comes down to it, the more boxes you do, the better you get at it. Okay, so moving forward, we're going to spend a little time talking about our options for storage mounts and supports. I like to refer to this as prepping or preparing your mise en place. And what in French, that means everything in its place. A wonderful paper conservator, Judith Walsh, taught me the importance of mise en place and having everything ready and prepared before you begin conservation treatment. And in this case, this means constructing storage mounts and supports for us. Okay, so to begin with, we need our planning, measuring, and designing tools. I would say that I use pretty much all of these when I make boxes and supports. So what we have here is we have both a small and large ruler, a T-square. I usually have at least a few tape measures lying around, as well as a notepad, and at least 3 or 4 pencils and erasers because they inevitably get buried. Okay, so by this point, you should have a pretty good idea about which type of housing material you're going to be using. So on one side, we have our paper or our blue corrugated board. And as you can see, there are numerous options. There's E-flute, E plus, B flute, double B flute, and so on. So I really recommend trying some different boards out and see what you like using best. I just discovered a new board since I got here in Fairbanks, and it's from Hollinger, and it's called Safecore Gray Corrugated Board, and it is my new favorite glue board product, and I really like it. And then also we talked about plastic. So we have our plastics, our Coroplast. And this also comes in different thicknesses, different weights, and also actually different colors as well. Typically, in most collections, you will just see, the good old white Coroplast or semi-transparent Coroplast most of the time. Okay, cutting tools. So starting from the left and moving to the right, we have a hot or electric foam cutter. These things are really great. It's a really great tool for carving and sculpting ethafoam block for storage mounts. It should be noted though, however, when you're using this tool, you really should be in a ventilated space or under a fume hood, because even though these materials are inert, as we talked about, when you carve them with this tool, they are heating up and melting, right? And they will give off an emission that you shouldn't be breathing in. So note to that. Next, we have a pair of scissors, then an X-Acto knife. The next item is a foam cutting knife, and these are really great tools to have when constructing storage mounts. They really cut through dense foam quite nicely. And then we have a regular old box cutter. And lastly, we have a bone folder. And this tool is under the sort of cutting tool section because it is actually what we're going to be using in order to bend our corners to make our boxes with the blue board, rather than cut or score our corners. Okay, now we have our mending or joining tools, which primarily consist of a hot glue gun or a physical means of securing, like cotton twill tape. So ideally, you will want to get glue sticks made from ethylene vinyl acetate, which is a tested and proven acceptable adhesive to be used on materials for storage and display of museum objects. Now, this is sort of debatable in both the conservation and collections world. Some people say it's not really necessary to get these archival glue sticks, and others will say that it's mandatory. So I can say, here's what I was taught. For joining box corners, or securing like big, ethafoam blocks or plank, I was taught to use regular glue pellets. Now, for attaching mount components that are going to be in very close proximity to your object, use the archival sticks. So now, these archival glue sticks are considerably more expensive than regular glue sticks. So you will have to figure that out. You'll have to figure that into your material budget and see if it works. Okay. So, and the cotton twill tape can be used to secure both paper and plastic boxes as well. And there are a number of metal, and that's what that picture is. I'm sorry if it's a bit obscure. It's sort of in the top right area. There's a number of these metal rivets or fasteners that can be purchased to secure your plastic coroplast box. Okay, polyethylene or PE foam products. These guys are the workhorses of storage supports and mounts. They are versatile. They come in various formats like, blocks, planks, different thicknesses of sheets, rods, tubes, and so on. Something I do want to mention quickly is that for the polyethylene foam rod, which is often referred to as backer rod, you need to make sure that you are getting the polyethylene backer rod and not the polyurethane backer rod, because the latter is not archival and it is not safe for long-term contact with museum objects. Okay, so next up we have some items, some Teflon tape, Tyvek, and acid-free tissue, both buffered and unbuffered. The Teflon tape is polytetrafluoroethylene, or PTFE, often called plumber's tape. You can call it plumber's tape, that's just fine. It is very useful as a protective, non-abrasive, flexible cover for storage supports. The film, it doesn't crease and tent the way that thicker, less malleable films or fabrics do. Tyvek, on the other hand, comes in a few different formats. One, I don't know if it just comes in a smooth Tyvek or it's called smooth Tyvek, but it's almost paper-like and it has a rattle to it. The other slightly thicker Tyvek is almost more textile-like. You can even sew into it and make little supportive pillows, which we will actually take a look at later. And lastly, we have tissue paper. And that's where we're going to take just a quick, brief detour to discuss buffered versus unbuffered tissue paper, which is a question I know I get asked pretty frequently. So all of this information can be found in one of the many fabulous NPS conservograms. And this one is on buffered versus unbuffered paper. Basically, buffered paper has an alkaline reserve, and it's impregnated into it during manufacture. So in this alkaline reserve is typically either calcium carbonate or magnesium carb. So what this does is it provides increased protection against migrating acids. So typically buffered paper is made with a pH around 7.5 to 8.5. Now, unbuffered paper does not contain that alkaline reserve, but that does not mean it is acidic either. So unbuffered tissues are essentially neutral with a pH of around 7 to 7.5. So if we look at our pH scale here, we see that the sort of happy zone or happy point for these materials is really around 7 to 8.5, maybe 9. I don't know, that's a little alkaline, but anything on either side of that range can actually be quite damaging to our materials. So instead of me listing every scenario where you would use either unbuffered or buffered tissue, I'm going to defer to the very thorough table provided in this conservogram that you can link to. And if you're interested, I will give you the PDF, but you can also just Google conservogram buffered paper and it'll come up. And they provide a really, really great table that lists a bunch of materials and whether you should use unbuffered or buffered. And so I'll say this though, as a general rule of thumb, when storing, quote unquote, vegetable-based fabrics or artifacts, such as cotton, either, buffered or unbuffered can be used. But when storing protein or proteinaceous-based fabrics or artifacts. So we're talking about leathers and furs, silk or wool. You should use unbuffered, as these materials should not be exposed to direct contact with that buffering agent. Okay, so back to supplies. So archival quality PE or polyethylene bags, totally acceptable. As long as the bag is big enough, nothing is being compressed, or, which I see a lot of, people think, that you put them in a bag and you can stuff them in a drawer. So we want to give things room and avoid compression and overcrowding of drawers. So something to consider though, or something to note, is that these bags carry static electric charge. So if you have an artifact that is flaking or unstable or has some sort of friable or powdery surface, it is best not to place it in a bag where vulnerable chips or surface features could be sort of pulled away from the surface due to this charge. Okay, Marble Seal. These are some products we're not going to get a chance to work with today, but I do think they are definitely worth mentioning. So Marble Seal is it's a flexible, heat sealable barrier material that resists transmission of oxygen and water vapor. So essentially, it is an impermeable membrane. It can be used for long-term storage as a liner for wooden shelves or shipping crates, with the objective of decreasing off-gassing from exposed wooden surfaces. And the reason why we don't use wood for long-term museum containers is that wood can contain VOCs, or volatile organic compounds, like formaldehyde, acetic acid, formic acid, and so on. And these actually will give off harmful vapors that can catalyze degradation, corrosion, and discoloration of our collection items. And lastly, I think I might have one more after this, but this is a corrosion intercept. And corrosion intercept, it's a film that contains highly reactive copper particles on it, and they're embedded in a polyethylene matrix. So this forms a highly reactive barrier for corrosive and oxidative gases. And this sort of film is used for the protection of silver, copper, brass, bronze, iron, steel. And it's also, actually, interestingly, it's used along with paper documents, film, and books, because it actually, the copper mitigates mold formation, which is a pretty cool feature. And like I said, we're not going to have time to go over textiles today, but I just want to mention a really great resource. So, textiles, they benefit from either being rolled or stored flat. You don't want to be folding them. And their housing system involves the same exact materials that we have just discussed, just in a layered and rolled format. So I really recommend checking out the CCI, Canadian Conservation Institute website for more information and some really great didactics on textile storage. I find that their website tends to be really, really thorough and great. Okay, so really I've just covered really a small portion of the archival materials out there. But if you are curious and you want to really see and feel these materials, or have a tactile experience, I really recommend you contact some of these suppliers and request a sample book. They have tons of them, and they are usually more than happy to sell you or give you these booklets. They're typically, relatively inexpensive, and they are really quite useful. I bring them when I do workshops so people can actually see the materials in person. And it's proven to be a good investment. Okay, so that concludes the first part of the webinar. So we're now going to take a brief intermission and get ready to go live and make sure all of our technology is working. So in the interim, I will put on a little slideshow of some different types of storage mounts. Yeah, thank you, everyone. And hang in there, hang tight, and stay tuned, and we'll be back shortly, and we'll be going live.
everybody. I'm going to flip it over to Nicole. There we go. And you are on.
Okay, hello. I want to make sure a few things that everybody can hear me. And then also, if you don't see, like, if your screen isn't, your full screen isn't me, what is it, Della? You want to hit the top right corner, speaker view. And then I think it might open up. So let's just make sure everybody can hear me. And then also you can see me as well. Okay, so I think we're good. Okay, great. Okay, hello everyone. Just bear with me a little bit. So right now, as you're looking at me, I've got a mask on, I've got these headphones with a microphone and gloves. So I'm feeling a little bit sensory deprived, but we're gonna get through it. Okay, great. So what I'm gonna do, I have a bunch of things to show you. I'm gonna try to get through as much as I can. But I definitely want to sort of see through a few objects and talk about the decision making process and what goes through my mind whenever I'm fabricating mounts. So as you see here, I've got my mise en place. Maybe not as neat and tidy as it should be, but it's all here and it's all present. Um, I have, you know, my space is ready to go. I have my artifact on the table. And I also have already made a decision about what type of board that I want to be using, which is going to be the blue board, actually the Hollinger Safecore gray corrugated board, which is, in my opinion, a superior material if you nerd out on those kind of things. Okay. What's that? Oh, it's the E flute. I'm sorry, the E flute Hollinger. And I'm not like being paid by them or anything. It's just really, it's a good board. Okay, so I'm going to take a seat. And so what I want to talk to you about is, you know, so we've got a series of artifacts here, and they're sort of off camera right now, but we're going through and rehousing them, and we're making these decisions based on a few things. Now, we talked about how polyethylene bags are completely fine. However, on this one, what I've noticed is when we're going through and looking at some of these items, I'm seeing little flakes of material. So that tells me a few things. So this goes to our condition assessment, right? Tells me that the surface of this may be unstable and the bag may be exacerbating that condition, okay? So we're gonna make a housing for it. So this is a harpoon point. It's in Yupiak from Katsuri. Okay. So I always like to have a piece of ethafoam sheet, and it's sort of like, you know, the tray, because, you know, this mat has seen a lot of boxes and pencils, so we want to keep a nice clean area for our artifact to rest while we are going to start building a box. Okay, so first thing is we're going to take some basic measurements. So, you know, when you're taking measurements of your artifact, you know, we're going to take a basic measurement, but you have to also consider access. So you're going to be constructing a box, but you don't want to make your box so tight that someone's going to have to jam their fingers down in there to get the item, right? So, you know, the measurement, I'm always a little bit generous. You don't want to be too generous, right? Because you're not going to try to make, you know, a box like this for this, because that doesn't make any sense. So, you know, you want to sort of find that happy point of, you know, a supportive, you know, container that's not wasting material, but you also don't want to crowd your object either. Okay. So I've got my little tape measure there. Now I am a visual person. I think a lot of us are in museums, but you know, I have to draw out what I'm doing. Some people will just write dimensions and go for it, and that's not how I roll. So what I do first is, and I don't sit here and draw the artifact, but it's a slender object. So I'll come in and just say, okay, there's my object. And now I'm going to build my box from that. So I'm actually making a little diagram on my paper so that I know when I go to cut my board, that I have an idea of what I'm doing. Okay, so I'm gonna come in and take some measurements. So, we've got about 6 inches long. Turn it around. And, we're just over, I don't know, maybe 3/4 of an inch wide. So that's going to be a small box. And really, I'm going through the steps to show you how to make the box. But, if you have a series of these, like this would be maybe a good candidate to make a tray and have multiples. Okay. But just for the purposes of demonstrating, starting small, and then we're going to move on, I am going to make a box for this. So, we have our measurement, which, I said is about 6 by 3/4. Now, I feel like I need to have a length or an interior dimension of about 7 inches. I'm going to give it some room. And then I actually want to make my width about 1.5. So I'm going almost double, because think about when people are going to be accessing this. They're not going to come in with 2 hands and pick it up. I mean, they're going to come in here, and that's where they're going to pick the artifact up. Okay, so those are my basic measurements. So I'm going to come over to my notepad, and so I say, okay, I've got my dimensions. I want, my platform is going to be, 7 inches by 1.5. Okay, but you have to think about, we're not just making a tray, because this is a tray and we'd be done. Okay, so we are making something that comes up around the sides. So as personal, my personal preference is I don't make a ridge or a ledge shorter than 1 inch. I feel like if you try to cut that corner less than 1 inch, you're going to end up with problems, and your board's going to bend weird, or your coroplast is going to cut your hands open. It is just a mess. So give yourself 1 inch minimum. That is my recommendation, and that's how I do it. So, okay, we're going to come over, and so I know that in addition to my 7 inches by 1.5, that I need to add 1 inch on all sides of that. Okay, so that's our math. So I know that 7 inches plus 2, so we got to do a box. Our outer dimension is going to be 9 inches, and then 1.5 plus 2, 3.5. So we're going to go, that's going to be our box dimension. Okay, so I have my basic idea of what I'm doing here. I'm going to move my artifact. Very important. We don't need it right now. We're going to move it away from cutting tools and pencils. So I'm going to come in with my blue board, and these cutting mats are great that have the ruler built in. But I double check with everything, even when I'm using the T-square, because oftentimes when you get scrap board, which is what this is, it is not square. So I'm also neurotic about making boxes and everything. So I tend to do both, and that's me. You don't have to do that, but I do that. So this board, luckily, and it's a little bit of pre-planning, is 9 inches long. But I do need to come up, and I need to make my width dimension, which is going to be, we talked about 1.5, 2.5, 2.5, 3.5. So 3.5 inches. I'm going to come in, make my marks. Okay. Now, actually, before I cut this, I'm gonna mention something really quick. Now we're working on a really small scale, so this is not going to make the difference here. But imagine this is a full-size harpoon, and we're building a massive box for it. So your corrugated blue board, it has the corrugation. So this is like the corrugations right here are running up and down. Okay, so you want, when you're making a long rectangular box, what you want is for your corrugation to span the narrow part of it. So if you're making a long box, you don't want the grain or the corrugated to go all the way down. They actually can create a lot of weaknesses within your box. So you sort of want to cut your box against the grain. I don't know if that makes sense, but basically, if you have a long box, you want your grain or your corrugation to go up and down. Just FYI, I always forget to do that, and then I regret it. So, okay, so now I'm going to cut my board because I have my dimensions. So over here, I've got my cutting tools. And I'm going to use just a regular old box cutter. It is definitely worth the investment of getting a good box cutter and one with really good, changeable blades. Because when these go dull, or if you buy a cheap one, they just end up tearing the board and it makes a mess. So a good sharp knife is definitely very important. Okay, so I'm going to make my cut. Keep a steady hand, apply even pressure, 2 scores. Okay, and we can move this away. Okay, so now what we need to do is we need to sort of map out where we're going to make our bends. Always close your blade. And like I said, I've already lost my pencil. Oh, there it is. And so now I need to make the marks where I'm going to do my bends. So we talked about 1 inch. I am going to use the pre-made ties for this. Make my little mark. And actually, this is such a small box. I'm going to go ahead and be a little bit bold and make my creases. But if you're not sure, and if you're questioning, if you made the right choice in your dimensions, you can draw out your lines, get your object, place it on your board, and make sure that you think that's appropriate, that there's enough room. Okay, so this is the bone folder. I'm sorry, or this is the Teflon. This is Angie's tool, and it's really great. It's got a nice pointed edge. So another thing, sorry, there's so many things to think about. Another thing is whenever you're about to make your crease, realize that, I didn't factor in 1/8 of an inch, that this is going to take away from your dimension. So some people will actually build that dimension into their box. I tend to just, when I do my compression or my scoring, I just move outside of my line, so I know that I'm not taking away from that inner dimension of where my object needs to be. Okay. So I come in, and what you're doing is just creasing the blue board, applying even pressure back and forth a few times. Okay. I was talking to Angie earlier, and I said, when I started making boxes and mounts, I actually learned on Coroplast, and then I felt like I discovered Blueboard, and thought, where has this been all my life? It's just a more friendly material to work with, in my opinion. Some people love Coroplast, and that's just fine. Okay, even pressure back and forth. So what I'm doing is starting to sculpt or form my box. Okay. Coming in, more pressure. Okay, so got that down. You can come in and give it a little workout, stretch it a little bit. So this is personal preference. Whenever I make a box, if I have a really long box, I like my tabs to come around to the long side, I guess. It's just personal preference, and this is not a lot of area to work with over here, so I think it can get kind of crowded. So what I'll need to do is think about that, because now I need to cut, right? So I need to cut so my tabs can hug around the side. So I need my ruler and I need my blade. So come in. Okay, do that cut. And I am doing this as quickly as I can. I know this is probably not the most exciting television, But it is good to, I just really want to emphasize talking through what I'm doing and what I'm thinking about as I'm doing these cuts. And so now this, like I said, because this board is magical, you don't have to skin it. So there's a technique that I think I will find it in a moment. But if you end up using a B flute or a bigger board, you can skin this top layer, and whenever you go to glue, it's nice and thin and clean and beautiful, and that's great. You know, I could do it right now if I can. This board's pretty thin, so I'm sort of gambling here. But I can see if I can sort of demonstrate that. But you know, what's good to do, if you're gonna do that, what it's really helpful for is if you're gonna make a lid. So these edges, I don't know if you can see, do you see, I mean, these add a girth, right? So they're adding a dimension. So if you're gonna outfit a lid for this and you take this dimension, like it might fit a little wonky or maybe it's too tight, but if you skin this down, it's almost flesh, okay? So what you're, essentially what you're doing is you're removing that flute. So you're coming in and skinning that top area. And like I said, I'm doing this sort of hastily with not really the right type of board because you don't, this board's so thin and nice, you don't really need to do it. But I'd still want to show you guys. So I'm coming in really, really gentle incisions because I don't want to cut this piece off because I need it, right? Okay, so let's see if we can get a close up. So I've skinned off the flute. So all I'm left with now is just sort of the paper, okay? All right, so another thing that the foam scraps are good for are being little blade protectors. That away, that down. Okay, so now I'm gonna do my glue up. I am using the fancy glue just because Angie had it out and it's easier and I don't wanna deal with 2 glue guns right now. So I am using the fancy archival glue. So I'm gonna come in and I'm just gonna do a couple of dabs. You don't need to go crazy with your glue. A couple of dabs, make your connection, add some pressure, and give it a minute. Okay. I'm gonna try to be a little bit hasty and do this a little bit quicker. So a couple dabs. I seem to go into Z formation for some reason. Okay, some pressure. And also these, you know, clips, especially if you're doing big glue ups, get these, I mean, these are just regular old office supplies. Clip it and move on. That one's already done, but we'll keep that one clipped. Okay, I'm gonna do my other sides real quick. Okay, a little bit of pressure. Oh, it's hard to try to do this so you guys can see it. So as you know, when you're making boxes, I'm usually like this, or I'm maybe off and holding items on my lap. So we're trying to hold it up and make it as clean as possible. Okay, so we're good to go. So there's my little box. And now I'm ready to think about like mounts and supports. So that's the only demonstration of a blue board box I'm going to do for you today because I think you guys will be able to pick that up. Okay. So now it's a little bit cooking show style here because, you know, we don't have a ton of time. So let's bring our artifact back onto the table. And, you know, you can set it in and I'm pretty happy with that. I've got space to access it or to retrieve it. And it fits nicely. So I'm pretty happy with that. Now, what I want to think about is how am I going to secure it in here? Now, think back to your condition assessment. So what was the one issue? Why are we making this box and why are we rehousing it? It's because it seemed to have some surface shedding. So even though I say we use ethafoam for everything, we do, but what kind of ethafoam? So like this is pretty abrasive. I would be nervous about using this as my base for this artifact. Something that's completely smooth and stable, sure, no problem. So I'm going to use my favorite. I think this is my favorite foam, and it's Volara. I think it's the best. So I have some pre-cut sections because of time. So normally, what I would do is there's a number of options here. You could place a little Volara bed in there, and you can tack it down and be done. Now, but that's going to create a little bit of problem for us because remember what we talked about, we gave ourselves some room, right? So we want people to be able to access this safely. So what I might do is I might install some bumpers, okay? So one option is this is the polyethylene, oh, I should get the whole thing, sorry. The foam rod. So bumpers might be my favorite storage mount component. They're easy, they're quick. I love the sound of cutting polyethylene foam. It's a great, for some reason, it's a great sound. Anyway, so you can also cut these in half, which I'm going to do when I haven't used this yet. This is a little overkill, but the foam cutter is great. You're gonna come in and slice that. Beautiful. Now, bumpers, where do you put these things? Well, let's look at where the object wants to go. It wants to sort of shimmy in the box that way. So I know I'm going to need at least 2 stabilizers, okay? So maybe I'll put a bumper on one side and maybe on another side, and then that might stabilize it. Or maybe I'll need to add a third. I'm not sure yet. So that's the thing about when you're working with these materials, you know, there are no rules. The rules are use these materials, but the rules are think about how to maximize a storage mount, right? So maximize the support with minimal materials. That's why I love bumpers, because it's 3 little pieces of foam. And Angie's got a roll in here. It'll probably last for the rest of everybody's lives. You know, it's great because you won't run out of it, and it's a really good material. So I'm gonna say that that's one option. Now I'm not going to make this permanent because I want to show you something else. So what I'm going to do is maybe we can bring this over, or maybe Angie, and like I said, this is not a permanent fixture in here because I'm going to show you some other things. So I've got a bed of Volara, a smooth foam, and then I've got 3 little bumpers, and that's going to keep it from wiggling around. Okay. And that could be done if you wanted. Now, if you're not excited about that, or you don't like the way that looks, there's another thing you could do. I'm gonna remove that. Remove my bumpers and my Volara. You could do a tie down. So same thing, Volara. I'm still gonna use Volara because of that surface. It's like my number one thing I'm thinking about is like what sort of smooth foam could I stick in there? Okay, so all I've done here is I poked 2 holes in a piece of Volara, and I've threaded some twill tape through it. That's as easy as it gets. No adhesive. So another thing I like to mention, if I can get away with not using glue, I will. So, admittedly, I'm gonna confess a little bit. I made these for a smaller box that I made for something else, so that's why they don't fit exactly. But I would make this foam snug in there, and I wouldn't glue it down. I would leave it like that. So I like to say, like, let's do the cut properly. Let's have it fit in there, pressure fit, and then secure it. Now, that's not going to be the case for everything you do, but if I can avoid glue, I do. Okay, and I need to do a little trimming on this one. Like I said, this was for another box, so it's not exact. Okay. Okay, so let's see what this looks like. I don't know yet. Let's try it this way. You know, this might work too. Now, I'm going to mention this because I'm a guilty person of this as well. When you make ties for storage mounts, make the strings long enough that you can tie them and untie them, and that people with big hands can tie them and untie them. It's my pet peeve, and I'm guilty. I've done it a million times. You just like make little ties, and it takes you 5 minutes to tie them. And then you're like, oh, that'll work great. And then the next person comes and says, who made these tiny strings that I have to untie and try to tie again? Nicole Peters did. Okay, so that's all, and that's, like I said, I'm just showing you these general different ways. And that to me is kind of nice. I know that that's not going to wiggle. It's a loose tie. And that might be acceptable or appropriate as well. Okay. So this is just a few different things to think about, and I'm looking at our time and we have to move on. So just think about condition, surface, a protective container, how to stabilize the artifact inside the box, right? With minimal materials. Okay, so I'm going to put this over here. Okay, and so I'm off the screen right now, but I'm coming back. Now, we are going to wrestle with a little bit of coroplast. So here is our next object. Now, like I said, we've talked about measuring, we've talked about giving things room, right? So I'm not going to go through that. I have made my dimensions. I'm ready to cut and go. I've decided what I think is enough room. But something really interesting about this item is I had to stop when I was planning this yesterday and ask Angie, well, how does this moccasin go? Are the sides down or the sides up? Because that's going to influence your dimensions of your box and what sort of mount you need. So before I even knew what I was doing, I was asking like, well, what's the intended orientation? And some of these you might not know. So you might need to reach out to cultural groups, and ask and have meetings about it. What is proper? Is this okay that I'm going to store it with the ankle portion up? Those are really important questions, and they absolutely should be pursued, okay? So coroplast, the beast of the materials. I'm just using this. We don't really need it for this moccasin, but I want to use it to talk about cutting and mending and joining coroplast, okay? So I've got my measurements all ready to go. You cannot, now this is, I don't know what mil this is or what thickness. The really thin coroplast, you can crease and bend. It's a workout, but you can do it. This you have to score. Now they make great templates where the coroplast box, when you're done, it all folds into each other into these tabs, and then you don't have these razor sharp edges. But that's a little bit outside of what we have time for today. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to come in. Did you guys see where my grain or my corrugation is? I'm making a long box. My corrugation is going this way. Okay, always thinking about that. Maximize your material. So you're maximizing the strength of this board by making a long box with the corrugation running this way. Okay, so I'm going to come in. I'm not using my T-square for a few reasons. A, it's big and I don't have a ton of space. B, this board is not square and I'm certain of it. So that's not going to be of great use for me. So I'm going to come in now. Scoring coroplast, you have to put some weight down and hope that this is not going to move. Did you guys hear that? So I'm cutting against the corrugation and praying that when I bend this up, it doesn't split off, and it didn't, so it's good. So, okay. So it's, I feel like I'm making coroplast seem dramatic. It's not. It's a great material. It's used all the time. I've been working with blue board for so long that when I have to return to coroplast, I get a little anxious. Okay. Now, something to think about when you're cutting this material, You saw I had to give it a little bit of strength, press down. Now I'm about to cut with the corrugation. Do not apply that much pressure. You will cut through the board. I have done it and regretted it. Okay, coming in, light pressure slicing. There we go. Oh, not enough pressure there. Okay, same thing over here. Now, joining coroplast. So when I learned to make boxes with coroplast, we had it was a method. The museum that I was working for, there was not a lot of free play. I mean, they had a method down, and you know what? It was great. It was efficient, and we got a lot of boxes made. But we had a whole system where we made these boxes, and they had these these metal fasteners that clipped on in very exact locations, and they had that system. That was a well-oiled box making machine, which was great. Okay, so now we have to talk about how we're going to join these. There are a few different methods, okay? I'm not going to spend a ton of time, but I'm going to discuss it in like cooking show fashion. Oops. Okay, I have one already made. Okay, so, okay, securing edges. I've done 4 different ways, okay? First way is you have to poke through this board. We're gonna review the 2 mechanical or physical ways that you can join this board. So you poke through, and I usually have a really sharp awl that I poke through that and thread the twill tape through it, and then I tie it up top. It's very simple, 1 hole. The next kind, this is a 2-hole join. This is a little more stable. The same thing, I am poking through the coroplast, tying it together. Now, the 3rd and 4th methods, I'm gonna actually demonstrate for you because I don't know if I explain them. I don't know, we'll see. But the one method is scoring and gluing. The next method, which is really cool, and I just learned about, is actually making a rivet out of hot glue, which I was pretty impressed with. So I'm going to set this aside for a second, and I am going to show you those 2 methods because I think it's really valuable. The tying down is, I think, pretty straightforward, and you can get that. So, okay, so when I am joining coroplast or making my edges, one way you can do it is you can score. So what I'm doing is, because if you try to glue flat surface to flat surface, it's just going to break apart. There's no grab there, right? So you come in and you get your knife and you start scoring your surface, okay? As you do this, you're going to start to see the flute break apart. That's okay. You don't want to go too much, but you want to go enough, because what you're trying to do is make sure glue penetrates into some of these interstices, okay? And you're going to do the same thing to the outside surface, because that's where we're joining, right? We're joining that to that. Okay, so I'm going to come in, do some scoring there. Okay. Now we're going to put some glue down. In this, you will definitely need clips. Coroplast is a clip situation. Okay, I'm going to stand up here. Okay, so I'm going to put some glue, and I really want to make sure it's sort of in there. I make sure that's really in there because you really want it to grab. Set that down, move it over, add some pressure, clip it. Okay, so while that's curing, this is the second method. I actually read an article on Stash about it. And it's really cool. So instead of that messy business I just did there, but it works, this is a very more organized way to do it. What this guy did, I'll try to do it like here, is he cut into his board and made a really nice, neat little square or, you know, loss of material. And he's not cutting all the way through, right? We're just cutting to get that outer layer of board away. And let's see, sort of rip that away. So you end up with like a little plug. I don't know if you guys can see that. Like a little plug in there. So then you do that. I mean, you can measure it and be 100% sure, but due to time, I'm actually just gonna sort of wing it a little bit. And I'm gonna do the same thing over here. And I'm gonna cut a little plug. Okay. Rip that guy out. Then it's kind of cool. You get your glue gun, try to do it, if you guys can see, and you basically fill up this loss and really make sure that that glue goes in there on both sides, really fill that up. And then you close it so that glue is penetrated within the flutes. And then it's also joining to itself. So that's like your plug or your rivet. And I just thought that was a really smart way, a really neat and cleaner way than my sort of crazy scoring that I was doing there. Anyway, we'll check in with that in a minute, right? But I just wanted to show you that. I thought that was worth sort of demonstrating. Okay, so it is hot in here with a lab coat and a mask and earbuds and gloves. Okay. All right, so, you know, this is sort of a demo piece, but we're still going to talk about making a support for this moccasin, okay? Now, like I said, I mentioned, you know, when I was talking to Angie about the orientation of this, you know, the first thing we want to look at, especially with leather, especially with shoes, especially with textiles, what's happening to this moccasin right now is that there's a lot of compression that's happening around the edge. So what we want to do is create a system that alleviates some of that creasing and pressure. But here's the big but: don't overstuff your moccasins. I have worked in so many collections where the project is unstuffing the moccasins, okay? Because people get really excited. You know, you're doing something, you're making something better for the collection. They get, you know, stockinette or something, and they really stuff those moccasins so they're almost bursting. So you really got to keep that in check and really think about, we're talking minimal. We want to alleviate. And also, this leather is very supple and very flexible and very easy to work with. Now, if this were a rigid, stiff leather, I wouldn't do this, okay? You'd never want to push your artifact to make it work inside a mount, ever, period. So the reason I'm willing to sort of pursue some of this is because of, I know that this leather is really supple and really flexible. So I'm going to throw out a few ideas. First off, we never put the moccasin. We're going to line it with a little bit of Ethafoam, pre-cut. And then, so I was playing around with some ideas. There's a ton of different ways. People sew these amazing Tyvek slippers that slip into the moccasins. I did not have time to do that. So what I've done is the quick and dirty Tyvek stuffer, okay? Now, I need to mention this. I've stuffed a lot of moccasins or parkas that need support, especially, you know, if you lay a parka flat, where are the creases? The creases are down the side of the garment, right? So to pad that out, you can use tissue. You would want to use unbuffered tissue, right? But, you know, you can make these awesome little Tyvek, pillows, essentially is what they are. Now, I did the quick and dirty and I glued this. You don't want to do that. You want to sew them, okay? And you stuff them with, it's like a polyester batting material. Now, you have to make sure it's just like the glue, but this is a little more important. There's two kinds, there's two breeds of this batting. There's a chemically formed, chemically bound, then there's needle punched. So one is a physical means of binding, no chemicals, and the other is chemicals. You have to get the needle punched batting. That is critical, and that is not, there's no give on that, because what happens, those chemicals will leach out. Tyvek is a permeable membrane, and they will migrate through to your textiles, okay? So that's an important one. Okay, so let's play around with alleviating this crease. So there's a couple of things I want to show you. This is our polyethylene backer rod. Now I'm gonna do some rearranging here. We have sort of a little bit chaotic. We have some strings out front. Let's open up our moccasin. Now I was thinking, like, what if we could insert something that would sort of, it's easy to, put in, easy to remove, and it would be quick. These are great, but when you sew a sock to put in a moccasin, that's going to take you a few hours. So all I did was I inserted a little bit of that polyethylene foam rod. Now I'm going to sort of coax it along in there because the heel is compressed in the back. Like I said, you will not do this with something that's not flexible. And you still are exercising a great amount of caution here. Okay, so it almost looks like I didn't do anything, but I did. That's a lot less of a crease. And that took me how long? Less than a minute. So if you're going through a collection of moccasins and you've got a tons, maybe that's the immediate thing you can do. Maybe you can come in and insert some foam supports and move on. And then when you get more time or money or help, you can come in and sew these amazing Tyvek sewn batting filled pads, So, but just to show you the difference of what that might look like though. So I'm going to remove my rod there. Okay, we're going to insert this guy. Now, the point of this, like I said, it's really paramount to, I really can't emphasize enough, do not overstuff the moccasin. The moccasin, like, look, I can do this, and there's still a lot of give there. I'm not stressing it. I want it to be relaxed, and I don't want to stress those seams or really any part of it. You're just supporting it. So I'm very happy with that. And you see that shape I had nothing to really do with the moccasin, but it's enough to sort of prop it up, and it's alleviating that crease there, okay? Now for the top part, I haven't quite figured that out yet, but I've been playing around with some ideas. I did have a really good piece of Volara around here. I was thinking about making a collar. So like, what if I came in here and I inserted a collar? So a rigid, semi-rigid form. And then I could bring this up and maybe support that with some Tyvek. Maybe I'll make a tie and come around. And like I said, I'm just showing you ideas. This is not a finalized product, obviously. But look at that. I mean, so, and then around here, the laces, because they're tied, so I'm not messing with it. I just leave it. But they can sit in the front. And then that was 5 minutes, less than 5 minutes. Okay, and I'm not saying that maybe, probably needs some refining, right? But these are just the ways that you have to think about maximizing materials, maximizing your time. Everybody wants to make custom socks for their moccasins, but sometimes it's not practical, unfortunately. There's not enough time. Okay, so we got to come in, and I'm just going to give it a temporary home. I am going to come in probably later today and actually make a collar for it, so it will fit properly inside of this container. But for now, I'm going to set it there, and now it's almost done. It's almost rehoused. Okay. So next up, I think we have time for one more. The time, where did the time go? So here's an idea. And this will have to be the last one, unfortunately. But here's an idea about working. Once again, I'm thinking, how can I make something that is not going to take a ton of material, a ton of my time, but it's going to work? So I've already made my box for this. And all I did, this was a really fun project that Angie actually mentioned to me. And I had a pre-cut thing somewhere, I'll find it. Is, we talk about groupings and keeping them, contained and in the same box, okay? So, making an individual separate box for each one of these is bananas. We want to keep it in one box with a divider. It's just going to make things easier. And I'm just looking for something. I don't know what, there it is. Okay, sorry guys. So all I did, I just want to show you this. All I did was crease some blue board. So do you see? I've got these sort of partitioned areas. And I snipped an edge off, 2 edges off. And what I did, I did my assessment of these. The surface is stable. I'm going to use regular ethafoam, no glue. It's actually cut this one properly. It fits in there really well. We're going to move this block because we don't need it. And what I done was I made these little blue board dividers that I'm going to actually just sink in to this box. And then I'm going to place my objects in there. And something I really like about this, and, like I said, people may not like this. This might not be everybody's thing. But for me, what I really appreciate doing these sort of simplistic designs is that people understand the mount when they're, I have personally encountered storage mounts that I have walked into and I say, I don't think I'm going to get this back together. Like, that's how complicated they are. Okay. And some artifacts need that. Yes, 100%. But if you can do a solution like that, and that will take you 5 minutes, I'm not saying it's perfect, but it's dividing the objects. They're on a bed of foam. They're separated. I'm not worried about the blue board, being that close because the surfaces are stable. And people might say, well, that's a little crowded in there. How are you going to access that? Well, they're not attached. So you could just pull them out and then you can access your collection items, okay? So similarly, I think this is a really cool idea, so that's just the same piece of board I used to make those. So you can divide things like this, right? Or you can divide them like this. So this is kind of cool. So you can get your blue board and sort of make it accordion-like, right? And then you can stick it in a box. And this one I probably would secure with a little glue, just because there's a lot of up and down components here. But then you have, whoops, sorry, I'm doing this without gluing anything down, so things are sort of a little wild. But then you have a box where you have partition spaces. And then what if you have a bunch of little dolls? They could fit in there, or little bottles, anything. And so you've just made a storage container for 7 or 8 objects, So it's just thinking about like how minimal effort. I mean, you're putting effort into it. You're not doing sloppy work, but thinking creatively about these things is really what makes it fun. And there are so many ideas. I've run out of time, but there are so many things that just play around with this material. It's really a time to just be creative and sculpt and try to think about really different ways to house your items. Like I said, maximize your materials, minimize your time and your expenses. Anyway, we are out of time. I apologize. I wish we could have gotten to more. There's just so much to say and I probably talked too much. But thank you guys so much. I hope you all are staying safe and healthy. It was a pleasure to do this. I hope you enjoyed it. Please, if you have questions, I think Della is going to share my email. If you have questions or comments or anything, please feel free to email me. I am extremely busy right now, so it might take me a few weeks, but I will get back, and I'd love to have conversations with you. So thank you all for attending.
Okay, I don't know how to get back gallery view. There we go. So thank you guys. I'll just kind of reiterate what Nicole just said. Thank you for attending. Thank you, Nicole, for an amazing educational experience. I learned a lot, and I hope you guys did too. Like I said at the beginning, you will receive an email that will have a copy of this presentation, so you can go back and relearn what you just learned and practice it right next to Nicole. And also a survey. So the survey is super simple, just a couple questions, and it just helps us to improve for future. So thank you all. Have a great afternoon. Have a great weekend. Bye. Bye.